we've got Janet who is our New Zealand country contact for Women's Declaration International, and she's going to interview Suzanne Levy. And Suzanne Levy is a lesbian and a mum from Wellington. She is the spokeswoman for Speak Up for Women and is focusing on areas of legislation and policy where sex-based rights have been misrepresented by hugely successful but wrong activists. She enjoys tennis, golf and karate and hanging out with her family. In her other life, she is an IT consultant. Over to you, Janet, for that.
Oh, hi there. Yeah, so Suzanne is the spokesperson and co-leader of Speak Up for Women New Zealand. There's been a lot happening as we've been talking about in the UK and in New Zealand over the last week or two. And we've just heard Joe talking about how in the Supreme Court, the word for sex is now definitely defined as biological sex, and woman is biological woman. And it doesn't matter if you got a gender recognition certificate, that doesn't mean you are legally the opposite sex. So could you tell me, Suzanne, what is the response of Speak Up to Women to this? And how have you seen the response happening in New Zealand? And what do you think the implications are for New Zealand?
Okay, so the response has been, our response is that it's a fantastic decision. But there are, key things that we got out of it. The first thing that we love about it is the term certificated sex. I think it's a phrase that we've all been looking for a while, and it's, we all know what it means, and you kind of know it when you hear it, and it's that kind of thing. And the other thing was the way the judges described the coherency of the Act, and I think that's where the Equalities Act and the Human Rights Act are really similar in that if sex doesn't mean biological sex, then a whole range of sections in the Act are just not coherent. They're just nonsense, and so I think some of the wording from the judgment is just sensational. It's like it's such good material to use. It's actually not. It's not written in a way that makes it inaccessible or ridiculous to read and to quote. And so I think that my favourite one is the one in terms of lesbians not being attracted to what is it? I'm sure you know it, Joe.
Certificates, yeah.
Yeah, not being attracted to it. Yeah, not sexually oriented towards a person in the possession of a certificate. That's just it's musical, isn't it? Yeah. So I think there are lots of similarities in New Zealand and the UK, as I said, and we're working through how we can leverage it to the maximum. So and the funny thing here is that we've got trans rights activists who are saying, nothing to see here. It's nothing to do with it's UK law. It's nothing to do with New Zealand. But at the same time, they're having little hysterical moments all over the place about how terrible it is. So so have I answered any of your questions yet, Janet?
Yes, you have been talking about some of the response in New Zealand and what your response is at Speak Up for Women. That's fantastic. So the other thing was about the implications for New Zealand, but we can also go through some other questions and we'll draw them out there if you want. Well, you can talk.
Yeah. I was going to say the interesting thing about the New Zealand situation is that we had sex self-ID pass in 2021, but it has a section in the legislation, and the section is called certificates as evidence, and it basically says that a birth certificate isn't necessarily evidence of somebody's sex. So while the birth, deaths and marriages legislation, the sex self-ID legislation makes all sorts of changes to what you can do to a birth certificate, not just sex self-ID, but various other things as well. It also says, look, this certificate doesn't really count in terms of sex, and it came through during the legislative process that there was only one organisation in New Zealand, or one government organisation, that used the birth certificate sex marker in any meaningful way, or any way at all, and that was our prisons. So in New Zealand, it's called the Department of Corrections, and they had a policy that said you had to put an inmate in the prison that matched their birth certificate. And they were the only one. And it was really interesting. Even schools, when you apply to school, they need your birth certificate, and not as evidence of your sex, just evidence that you're allowed to attend school in New Zealand, that you were either born here or whatever. So, yes, corrections was the only one. And as part of passing the self-ID law, one of the provisions was that was changed, and that corrections could no longer say we will only, that we have to follow the birth certificate. So we've got the section, it's called Section 79, which is the lovely little out clause, and we've got the fact that corrections were able to, or that they had to change their law in order for this to be passed. It was a condition. It really says we don't believe that you're changing sex, or that your birth certificate has changed your sex. And that's where that lovely phrase certificated sex comes in, because that is what we have. And clearly there's biological sex and there's certificated sex. So this is a really good way of kind of highlighting how that's working for us, and it's giving us a chance to articulate that, because it's a really complicated issue to get across to people. And that we have self-ID, but we don't have self-ID. So this is actually helping. It's helping us to do that.
Yeah. There's a parallel there between what the Supreme Court has just said about this gender recognition certificate and what and how it's not really about what sex someone is, and there's a bit of a parallel with our law, which says, well, the birth certificate isn't really necessarily verifying your sex either, sort of thing. Yeah. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. How about the Law Commission, as you know, are looking at have made proposals to change the Human Rights Act and are developing this right now, and they are proposing to add gender identity and expression into the Human Rights Act. How do you think that how do you think this decision of the Supreme Court would influence them, or would it?
Firstly, I don't think that they haven't proposed that. They haven't made any recommendations at this stage. So they are going to be putting a paper out. That they said it would be the middle of the year. So I'd be thinking in a month or two. And that's their recommendation that goes to the Minister of Justice about what to do. I would imagine that they will be looking at the implications of the UK ruling when they, it's not too late. They'll obviously be a fair way through their paper, but this is it's a very significant piece of legislation for New Zealand. It's not something that they're going to just sort of, discard or ignore. So I think it's interesting that in the UK it's shown that there is a way, when you clearly define sex, there is a way that you can provide anti-discrimination legislation for transgender people, if you can define transgender people. So that's something that they will hopefully pick up, that if you make a category, or you make a special characteristic or a protected characteristic for so-called transgender people, that a really important part of that is then to define sex so that it can still stand alone and where it needs to. And so hopefully they will learn something about that from this judgment, because the Equalities Act has is the characteristic, is it gender reassignment? Is that what it's called, Jo?
In the UK, yes, it's gender reassignment.
Gender reassignment. So we don't have that in New Zealand, but they're looking at adding something like that. So hopefully they'll learn and say we can add something a little bit like gender reassignment, but we have to be really careful that we define sex in the way that you've just done in the UK. So that's what I would hope.
Okay. Okay. So over the last week, Casey, I hope I've got her name right, Casey Costello, the Associate Minister of Health, gave instructions to New Zealand Health, that's our Ministry of Health, to use the word woman instead of person with a cervix or pregnant person. So she's saying we need clear language that people can understand. And this directive, just came out last week. So what is your response to her directive?
Oh, well, it's great. I mean, it's common sense. It's what's not to like, about something like that. It's good.
Yeah.
But it's ridiculous that we have to even go there, but it's,
Yes.
we'll take it as a win. Yeah.
Right. And do you think that might have any effect on, as both Casey Costello's directive and the Supreme Court judgment, do you think these might have any effect on what the Midwifery Council is doing with their scope of practice, where they've been trying to erase the word woman and mother, but they're running up against a lot of roadblocks, and they're once more now it's under consultation again, isn't it? Right now.
It is. Well, the midwifery scope of practice is a little bit odd in that the issue wasn't so much that they were removing the word woman and replacing it with person who is pregnant or whatever. It was that it's a uniquely New Zealand word, whānau, which means family. And the issue that we picked up and lots of other groups picked up was that you couldn't provide a medical service such as midwifery to a family. It's to a single person, and that person is the mother and then later the child. So it wasn't so much about the traditional, I shouldn't say traditional, but the general issue we deal with which is trans inclusive language versus practical woman inclusive language. It was sort of a different thing. It was to do with not treating the woman as the central character in her pregnancy, and obviously it can't work. Health and Disabilities Act doesn't sort of allow you, a medical practitioner, to work in that way for privacy reasons. That the medical practitioner has a patient, and it doesn't necessarily include everyone who comes along with that patient. So that was more the issue with that one. But I guess it's all still sort of, it's relevant in that we need to look at what legislation focuses on women and whether it's doing it the way it should. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, also last week, I think it was, or this week, we had from New Zealand First, Winston Peters, the Deputy Prime Minister, announced that New Zealand First is going to put a private members bill through Parliament, which is going to say that the words like woman and man have to have the biological meaning in legislation. I think it's called the Legislation Definitions of Woman and Man Amendment Bill, and also that this bill they're going to present will protect women's spaces. So what's your response to this announcement?
Well, it's a bit of a funny one because the word woman is not really the contested word in our legislation. It's the word sex. So I think our Human Rights Act does contain the word woman in relation to one particular section, but it's not really the issue. So you could say that this is the meaning of the word man, this is the meaning of the word woman, but I'm not quite sure what the consequences of that will be. Like, it's not the word sex is the word they need to define, which is so. But I guess it gives a bit of weight to the old legal or social contract that we used to have, where everyone knows what a woman is. So I guess if you could say, well, woman is defined in law in this way. But in terms of saying that it's going to change it, or it's like a glossary of terms, isn't it? It's like you're defining a term in the glossary that's not in the document. So it's kind of got limited use, I think, in legislation. But good on you, Winston.
Yeah, you're sort of saying that the words woman and man are actually not that much in legislation at the moment anyway.
No, they're not. I mean, there is, not in a way where, the word that matters is the word sex, because it features it. It's a character, it's a protected characteristic, but more than that, it's a characteristic that you are allowed to lawfully discriminate on the basis of.
Yeah.
So that's where it's really important. Where, man and woman, not so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, in March this year, Speak Up for Women presented a petition to Parliament, and the petition said that the House of Representatives defines that sex in the Human Rights Act 1993 and any other legislation has the biological meaning. So, when I saw them doing these things, I thought, oh, that's sort of a bit like what you were asking for, but now you're saying it's not really what you were asking for exactly at all. The important word is
it's not. I think they kind of got an idea and sort of ran with it, possibly not quite in the right direction. But they accepted our petition, and our petition is going before the petitions committee, and we're actually working on a submission to go alongside it at the moment. And the UK ruling is going to form quite a significant part of that. Yeah, and we did the petition because of the UK thing coming up. We knew, that there were.
Oh, right.
So we sort of latched onto that. Yeah, so we won't take any credit for originality with that one.
Cool. Yeah, good timing then.
Yeah, good timing.
Yeah. So what about the relationships and sexuality education framework? Because that's been, the relationships of sexuality and education guidelines have been very controversial now for a few years, because they included a lot of educating very young children about gender identity and really pushing those sort of concepts. And how do you and the New Zealand First did get into the coalition agreement that they were going to actually going to get rid of that one and replace it with another one, and now they've got this one, which their framework that which they're looking for taking submissions on right now. So how do you see this new framework that they're proposing?
It's good. I mean, to be clear, it's actually not New Zealand First that developed it. It's national. Erica Stanford. So Erica, Erica and her team come up with it. No, what we've sort of pushed for in terms of sex education has very much been, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's lots and lots of very good relationships and sexuality education around consent, relationships, safe relationships, biology, contraception, pregnancy, all of that sort of stuff. That, in particular for women and girls, that's really vital that they're learning that. The more information they have about their bodies and relationships and all of that, better. But no gender identity, thanks. Let's not teach that people are born in the wrong body. So we're pretty happy with it. It's good. It doesn't talk about pornography at all that we can see, which I think is something that would be good to have in there. And we do wonder whether it would be worth them mentioning gender identity as a belief system that some people have, but not, very clearly not taught as fact. Maybe for older kids, like sort of 14, 15-year-olds, that kind of age, just as opposed to just pretending that it's not a thing that features for some people, because there are people that believe it. But that would be very tricky. And I probably, if I had to just take what they've done now, the framework, I would. Yeah.
Cool. So just finally, if there's anything else that you think significant that might be happening in New Zealand because of the Supreme Court judgment, and do you think the tide is turning internationally, including here?
Yeah, I mean, the tide is turning. Yeah, for sure. I think. But we sort of Speak Up for Women. We try to take a very measured, consistent approach. We're doing it through legislation, policy. The biggest issue in New Zealand is that our policies do not match our laws. So we have policies, for instance, our customs and police strip search guidelines. Now, they're based on legislation. The legislation talks about nothing but sex in terms of who can search who. The policies say gender identity. So, you know, and they weren't done after 2021 when self-ID came in. They were done probably 2017. So, you know, there's been this kind of push for all of that, and it's right through government. It's through all the NGOs that have anything to do with government. It's just everywhere. And so the issue we have is in comms. It's in getting the message across that that's not the law. Yeah, where people just think it is. So that's a massive job. But things like the UK ruling really helped with that, because there's so many people who just have no idea it's even happening because the media are so, you know, quiet. And then things like this happen and they can't ignore it. So we get some airtime. So it's all good.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Suzanne. Well, we're
Thanks,
out
Jenna.
time with that, so.
Oh, yeah, and thank you for everyone.
Oh, thanks, Anna. Anna Kerr.
Sorry, you've done a great job. You've done a great job, both of you. Thank you.